Okay. Now, collectively, we all represent nonprofits important to our community, which are doing their very best to adapt, change, and overcome the challenges presented by coronavirus. Now, I know we all face uncertain times ahead of what we can achieve, how we will serve our community, and how we will keep our doors open. But I just wanted to say that collectively, we are a community, and we are in this together, and we are all here to support each other. We all work for a startup company, but myself and both my co-founders are also deeply involved with other nonprofits in our community as well, both as board members and staff members as well. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage for our group. So the next part of the presentation, I'm just going to go over some basic best practices about volunteer management. I'm sure this is going to be kind of a review for a lot of you. And so just bear with me, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. But one of the first things that I think is always important to think about when it comes to volunteer management is that more strategic aspect of working with volunteers, focusing primarily on what the need you're trying to address is. And within that, really making sure that you can answer all these questions. So what is the goal of the volunteer activity or operation that you're working on? How's that goal or how's that activity support your mission or your organization's mission or your organization's objectives? What can your volunteers realistically do given their skill sets, their capacity, and the times that we live in, the social distancing and social isolation and prohibitions on large gatherings of people? What is the scope of volunteering? Is it going to be an ongoing event? Is it in person? Is it not in person? How long is it going to take? How much autonomy do your volunteers have to represent your organization and to work with your constituents? What are going to be the metrics for your success? How do you know if you've succeeded? What kind of things are you going to be tracking? Sometimes it's as simple as just your volunteer hours and the number of volunteers that you have, but maybe you're tracking outputs. So what are the things that your volunteers are actually doing? How many interactions do they have with stakeholders or constituents or those people that you're serving in the community? You always want to make sure you have a really clear sense of the things that you're going to be tracking before you start down any volunteer opportunity that you may have. What does success look like for your organization? How do you know if your volunteers have succeeded? How do you know if that opportunity has succeeded? This is important not only to know kind of what you're trying to achieve, but also maybe when it's time to stop a volunteer program or to change a volunteer program. When you've achieved your mission and you've achieved success, do you need to keep doing it, or should you pivot and do something different? You also want to think a little bit about what the impact is going to be, not only on the community, but also on the stakeholders that you work with, your constituents, the people that you're serving, but also thinking about what the impact is going to be on the volunteers themselves. Volunteering is not a one-way street. Volunteers give their time and their energies to your organizations, but they also get things out of it. Sometimes it's tangible benefits, and sometimes it's intangible benefits. So how do you help them understand the impact of that? And then also what's really important is thinking about how you're going to tell your story. So how are you going to tell the story of what your volunteers are doing? How are you going to tell the story of your organization? How are you going to tell the story of what you, your organization, and volunteers collectively do together for the community? And thinking about sort of anecdotes or things that you want to collect to be able to successfully tell that story, because storytelling is a really critical part of your mission. So next up on the next slide is going to be our first poll question. And so we're going to be using a platform called Poll Everywhere, which maybe some of you have used before in the past. But we're using it for a couple of different reasons. So one, I was interested to see how well it would work in a bigger Zoom meeting like this. I've seen it used typically more in bigger in-person presentations where they're collecting audience input. But I also wanted you all to be able to try it out as an option for engagement or data collection as well. Things that you may be struggling with as an organization, to see what it's like as a user, to see if it's something that maybe your volunteers would respond to or feel comfortable using. Now, I know it may be a little bit tricky for some of you to use, and that's okay. Just bear with us, and if you have any challenges with it, we have a couple different options for how you can respond. So the first poll question that we're going to have is, what is the most unexpected effect on your organization as a result of COVID-19? Now, there's going to be three different ways that you can respond. So the first one is to open a web browser of your choice and respond using that link, polev.com/savma206. You may have to exit the full screen mode on Zoom to get to your taskbar or your dock to open a web browser. If you don't want to do that, you can also use your smartphone and go to the link on a web browser on your smartphone. And finally, if neither of those options is very comfortable for you, you can also just post your responses in chat and one of my colleagues will capture them and enter the poll. And so Basil also posted the link in chat, so you can copy that to make it a little bit easier. And let me go ahead and make sure that that poll question is open. Everyone's comfortable with it now. And then we will, one moment, let's make sure it's active. Okay. All right, so now the poll question is active. So let's take just maybe a minute or two and enter your responses. And then as they come up, you should start seeing them show up on the screen. So, and I'm going to kind of read them out as they come in. So I cannot find volunteers. That's a big problem for volunteer managers. And again, if you're having any trouble entering the response into the web browser, feel free to go ahead and type in the chat, and one of my colleagues will be able to enter it for you as well. So you cannot use the volunteers that you have. Yeah. Not being able to utilize our current volunteers. Can't use the current volunteers we have. Volunteers we haven't seen for a while are participating in virtual activities. So trying to figure out a plan for reopening and keeping everyone's needs in mind. Ways of engaging with volunteers is extremely limited. So some of your volunteers might be particularly vulnerable to coronavirus and are staying home. We'll give them just one more minute. No events. Yeah, that's huge. That's kind of troubling that somebody put in chat as a mental health provider. You would expect a huge number of calls, but you haven't had as many calls as you expected. Yeah, a lot of volunteers are in that vulnerable age group. So as you can see, just kind of right off the bat, I mean, there's probably three common themes that you are all sort of talking about, or things that are unexpected. So, you know, activities are just not possible. If you have big volunteer operations or events that are in person, they're just not feasible right now. Engaging with volunteers or figuring out ways to keep them engaged is challenging right now if you primarily had kind of in-person things. And then a lot of the volunteers that you may be working with are in vulnerable populations or don't feel safe. And that's maybe something that's a little bit more unique to Tucson, given, you know, our snowbird population and large population of retirees that we have that like to volunteer and give back in our communities. Okay. So let's go ahead and we're going to move on to the next portion of the presentation. So volunteer management process. So I'm sure you all are using some form of this. I like to think of volunteer management in kind of three big categories, and I'm going to talk about each of these in just a moment. But engagement, action, and impact. So the volunteer engagement is something that a number of you mentioned, and I think volunteer engagement kind of falls into three different categories. So the recruitment, so how are you finding volunteers? You know, maybe you were using in-person events or recruitment fairs to find volunteers previously, or maybe you were working with corporations or other community organizations that would bring big groups of volunteers out for your events. Those are probably not possible right now. So how are you finding new ways to work with volunteers, and how are you transitioning maybe to more email campaigns or social media campaigns for engaging or recruiting volunteers? The sign-up process, actually getting volunteers to commit to whatever activities that you may have. maybe you have a form on your website that you've been using previously, or maybe it was, more in-person signups or signing up, with sign-up sheets or a board at your physical location, or maybe more informal tracking via email or spreadsheets or something of that nature. So some of those in-person things might have changed. So now might be a good opportunity to, start looking more at online forms for getting volunteers to sign up. Integration also might be a challenge right now. So integration is really kind of acclimating the volunteers to your organization, helping them understand the culture of your organization, your values, making sure that you're all on the same page, and that they understand kind of what they can expect as a volunteer and what they can expect from your organization. And so that might have been done through sort of in-person events before, but now you really have to figure out how you communicate that, digitally. Maybe you're doing Zoom trainings or something like that, which I'm going to talk just about a little bit more about in just a second. But it's also hard to kind of communicate values and mission, through an email, because people are notorious for either not reading emails or not reading all of them through. So how are you ensuring that your volunteers are really understanding your organization's values and mission? So the next big bucket is really the action. So that's the volunteer activities themselves. So a lot of times you're going to need to do some kind of training. How are you preparing volunteers to be successful? Helping them understand any sort of legal liabilities or legal things that they need to understand for working with your constituents, privacy things or things of that nature, or any kind of training that they need to do to be safe in your facilities or safe working with your volunteers. I know some of you have already started offering training online for your volunteers. But if you haven't, that's probably a new challenge for you, is to figure out how to transition training to online platforms if you're trying to get them up and running, or trying to get volunteers up and running right now. And then the actual setup. So how do you create an environment for success for your volunteers? This might mean making sure volunteers have the resources and tools to successfully complete whatever activities they are working on. If you have more in-person events, that might have meant more logistical things, like making sure you have enough food and water to keep the volunteers happy and healthy, or any necessary supplies that they need to participate or do with their volunteer activities. But thinking about, digitally, what kind of resources are you offering your volunteers, or what kind of resources are you providing with them for any sort of online or digital activities that they might be doing. And then the actual activity itself. So how do you keep volunteers active and productive? You want to make sure that when volunteers are working with your organization, that they have everything that they, so when they're working with your organization, that they feel like their time is being well spent and that they're not wasting their time by working with you. That can be even more challenging if they're working remotely or working online, right, for your organization, or supporting your organization in some other way or independently. You probably need to do a lot more keeping track of those volunteers and keeping in touch with them to make sure that they are getting what they need, so that they feel like they're making meaningful contributions in a safe way for your organization. Next is the impact. And so recognition, how are you thanking volunteers for their support? I think this is really key, and probably what you wish a lot of you, what you wish you could spend the most time on in working with your volunteers. Really making sure that they feel recognized for the contributions they make to their organization, but how you do it has probably changed a little bit. So I know on one of the boards that I serve on, previously at our board meetings, we would write thank you notes to our donors and some of our volunteers in person at board meetings. Well, we're meeting on Zoom. So how do we continue recognizing volunteers? How do we send that personal note to donors and to some of our volunteers to help them feel appreciated? Evaluation, how do you collect evidence of success? And as I mentioned before, evaluation can mean a couple different things depending on what you're looking at. A lot of times I think organizations still are using kind of paper sheets or things of that nature. So you fill out a form when you're done volunteering, and then somebody collects that data. But that's not really possible anymore with things having to move online to more virtual or digital offerings. So how are you collecting, how are you collecting that evidence of your success? And there are a lot of online tools to do data collection. So you've probably heard of common ones like SurveyMonkey. Just Google Forms is a free and easy way to collect that kind of information. But one of the challenges with surveys and forms is the response rate is usually pretty bad. And so you need to think also about strategies of how can you be more engaging with your data collection. How can you incentivize your volunteers to respond to those forms? Maybe it's using something more kind of in the moment, like the Poll Everywhere software or something similar through some of your or digital events to collect that data. And then finally, storytelling. So how are you going to communicate successful results? And this, it's kind of where we bring volunteer management to full circle. So the better you're able to tell the story, the more you're able to recruit new volunteers, and the more support you're able to garner in the community, the better you're able to help your stakeholders and constituents understand the impact that your organization and your volunteers are having. And that's probably changing also as a result of coronavirus. Maybe some of you had big luncheons, once or twice a year, where you talk about all the amazing things that you've done over the past year and recognize all the amazing people that have supported you in the past year. But those big in-person 500-person lunches are not really possible right now. And so how are you transitioning that storytelling into alternate mediums? Maybe it's online through social media content, maybe it's different email newsletters. Video is a very powerful way of communicating success, but video production is also challenging. Yeah, so there's lots of different ways to kind of recognize, and these are just some of the things that I think you probably work with day to day on your working with volunteers. So next up, we're going to do the next poll. Bounce back over there. So I'm going to go ahead and activate that poll. And I think somebody jumped the gun and already got one response in. But again, so go back to that browser window that you had open before to enter the response. If you still have it open, you may need to refresh it for the new poll question to show up. Just a quick tip for a keyboard shortcut. So if you're on Windows, if you hit Control-Shift-T, that'll open the most recently closed tab that you might have had open. So if you accidentally closed it or closed it before, that's a quick way to get it back. Or you might still have the link in your clipboard that you can just copy into your web browser again. Is it not active? My bad. Sorry. I thought I hit activate. So even I run into problems with technology from time to time. So now the poll should be active, so now it should show up when you go to that link. So let's see the results start to come in. And I think this will give us a good sense on kind of where the biggest challenges are and what step of that process we're experiencing the most pain with. Yeah, so it's like by far and large, activity is the biggest challenge right now. Recruitment. All right, maybe one more minute. Yeah, so activity is the biggest one. Yeah, it's curious that orientation and training are kind of popping up right now a lot too. Yeah, I think some of the good news is orientation and training are some of the things that are easier to transition to virtual or online offerings. The exception being if your volunteer activity is heavily focused on in-person things, and they need to understand physical things at your space to be able to successfully volunteer. It would probably be a little bit harder to do kind of orientation or training to there. All right. But activity, by far and large, the biggest step in the process, and I think that is one of the things that's going to be harder to adapt in terms of how you work with volunteers. Because, you know, some of your volunteers, they do physical things and there's just no way around how those things work, and how, you know, the volunteers might be exposed to kind of in-person events, and, you know, ensuring that they're safe. But one thing I would encourage you to think about, and it's probably not going to be easy, but for your volunteers, are there ways that staff can maybe transition to do some of the in-person stuff and maybe some of the administrative work or some of the other work that doesn't require somebody to be in person? If there's ways you can transition volunteers into helping with that. And I know it's not going to be a good fit for every organization, but maybe that is something to think about and ways to keep your volunteers engaged. You know, and another way for volunteers to give them some activity or some engagement, things to do. You know, right now, financial situations for most nonprofits are precarious, and probably not going to be very fun for the next year or more. And so that's another way that you can ask volunteers to stay engaged with you and your organization, not necessarily asking them for you know, donations directly, but asking them to share your story and to tell their friends and to help you get the word out about your organization's story, and the impact that you have to try to collect greater community support. And so we had some responses in chat. So talk more in depth about online recorded trainings available out there, that activity and engagement, having people call or send in volunteer applications and having to be excited about their interest, but not having anything for them to do. Yeah. All right. So now we're going to have an opportunity to talk more in depth. So we're going to do a breakout session. I mean, I don't know if any of you have done a breakout session in Zoom before, but the way it works is we're going to set up 3 rooms. We're going to divide up all the participants into these 3 rooms, into 3 groups. And so what I want you to do over the next 15 minutes is to share the challenges or problems that you're currently facing. And I think we've identified some of the common ones here, so hopefully that will kind of focus in to determine the top 2 or 3 most common challenges that you're facing. And if possible, and if you have enough time left, to share any ideas or solutions you might have to overcome some of those challenges. Now, each group is going to have a facilitator / timekeeper. That's going to be myself, Basil, and Hunter. And then at the end of the 15 minutes, each group is going to share their findings. And so myself, Basil, and Hunter will report out on some of the common things that we heard in the group, and then we're going to have one more poll question about that, and then some time for some Q&A at the end. So let's go ahead and get those breakout sessions going.
Yeah, sort of looking back at some of the questions that were raised, there was definitely a conversation around, in our group at least, around looking at taking some of these trainings into that online format and making them so that you can, the specific example that we had was with the CPR training, making it so that you didn't necessarily have to pay the mother company every single time you did that training. And that was something that we weren't really sure how to do, but we did discuss that there might be other alternatives. So looking at other organizations that provide that training that might be willing to sort of offer that. The other thing that we discussed that I really liked, and we only discussed in the last minute or so, and I've forgotten who it was from our group, but there was the idea of actually looking at nearby non-profits, so these other companies, for potentially doing some level of volunteer sponsorship. So there are still companies that are that may be interested in offering some of their man hours, so to speak, from their employees to work for nearby nonprofits, which I think was a really interesting idea to explore. Hunter, did you come across anything?
Yeah, so we had some pretty diverse, organizations represented in our conversation, but we did come kind of to the conclusion that engagement and keeping people kind of invested in the mission and their respective jobs was the biggest challenge given all of the different factors that, are going into this current time that we're facing. And we talked about some solutions. The pretty common one we've all kind of experienced is moving to a more technological platform. But some great points were brought up as well about planning a little bit more in depth for the future, given social distancing guidelines that are coming out, as well as being prepared to perhaps backtrack a little bit or be prepared to go back to a time where social distancing is more pertinent, and having to kind of go about your business in phases and evaluate things on a more micro scale and being prepared for those things.
Great, thank you, Hunter. Yeah, and our group had some similar comments with the biggest challenges really that the opportunities or lack of opportunities, and how do you transition those to digital when some of them can't be for whatever reason, because there's some sort of task or thing that has to happen physically in the space, or because of privacy concerns and issues of working online, or some regulatory things that have to be overcome. And then just working with the volunteers themselves, that for a lot of the organizations, the volunteers are older and maybe not as comfortable with technology and are not as willing to change, or to have a tougher time transitioning to newer technology platforms, and or not feeling safe in terms of volunteering and wanting to come out, or being able to provide a safe space for them to volunteer and come out even if they didn't want to. But some of the successes that we heard too, Maria shared that ICS, one of the successes that they've had is being able to set up a no-contact food bank, to be able to transition their existing food bank into a no-contact format, so that their volunteers can again come out and work with that, but still be safe and still serve the community. In addition to standing up a whole new program where they had their volunteers go out and they get background checks, and they're able to go and do shopping for those who cannot leave their home. So those are some really good examples of how to modify an existing program as well to be reflexive and adaptive in standing up a new program. And I think in a lot of the conversations that I've heard and things, I think now is definitely a good time to take some risks and to try new things and new programs. Because everyone is, eager to give back. They're willing to maybe try some different things, and I think everyone is maybe a little bit more understanding of if something's not working, or that every organization is necessarily having to make changes to their programs and services. And so I think it's a good opportunity to maybe think more strategically about your volunteer activities, and maybe revisit some of those kind of out of the box ideas. Or maybe ask, go to your volunteers themselves and say, particularly volunteers who have worked with your organization previously and are having issues, or you're having issues keeping them engaged, maybe go back to them and ask them, like, well, you've worked with our organization before. Is there any way you can see helping us or volunteering with us that can keep you safe and that can keep us safe? And you never know, if that might generate some really good ideas and opportunities for them to come back and volunteer, and they might have some fantastic ideas for how they can best support your organization. Because I know, particularly when in stressful situations and you might be feeling overworked and overtaxed, which is something nonprofit professionals are kind of at a baseline for to begin with. COVID and all these changes and financial issues probably hasn't made anyone's life easier. And so you might be kind of stuck in a box in terms of your thinking and how to engage volunteers. So maybe looking for some outside sources or resources or opinions on how to kind of get people involved might be a good way to kind of get things flowing and open up again. All right, so we have one more poll question. I'll get back to PowerPoint. All right. So now this last question is a little bit different format. So I want you to just share what is one unique solution to a challenge that you heard. And this one will look a little bit different. So again, you can go back to your browser window that you'd opened before. Again, you may need to hit F5 or refresh to get the new question to show up. But this one will look a little bit different in that you now have the opportunity or option to up or down vote responses. And so if you see something that's already been posted, you can say, yeah, I think that's a great idea, or I really like that idea, or if you feel like you need to downvote something and it's not a great idea, you can do that as well. Now, one caveat, you may need to hit, there might be a button to say show responses or show more responses to get what people are entering up to show. So let's take a few minutes and I'll give you guys an opportunity to enter some of those responses and take a look at what other people are posting, and then you can kind of provide some of your own input and feedback on what people are posting. And I'll read them off as they come in. So partnering with companies to sponsor their employees as volunteers, so pairing volunteers with community members with outreach to form relationships, new partnerships to meet organizational needs, retention strategies using email, Zoom, social media, so volunteers get more comfortable using technology, another partnership with organizations or businesses within the community. I do believe this is time to take some risks and develop some new programs that may stretch us. A lot of support for retention strategies, partnering, give volunteers virtual opportunities to keep them engaged. Recording trainings to integrate in the future. Challenge of thinking out of the box and creating a new normal. Lending computers to those who may not have access. That's something we didn't really touch on a lot, but I think is a major issue as well with this transition to technology. Cross referrals between agencies. The lead is still the retention strategies. And we'll have one more minute. Retooling mission statements or yearly goals. Hosting virtual events to keep volunteers and stakeholders engaged.
And again, feel free to give those thumbs up on the load more responses on that page, just so we can sort of look at what matches for a lot of people. And
Chris, is there a way we can get a link to these answers and I can send it out to people with the evaluation form?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's one of the cool things about Poll Everywhere is you can download responses, and depending on kind of the plan you use, you can get some data and analytics on respondents and do some other cool things. I'm just using a very minimal version of their functionality, and I haven't dug too deeply into it, but it looks like there's a lot more to it. The downside is, I did a little research, and hopefully most of you are using TechSoup to help you get technology and IT structure, infrastructure, and things like that. But I was looking through it to kind of prepare for today, and I did not see a lot of kind of virtual tools or things like survey software or other things. So they have a lot of the IT bases covered for your basic IT needs, but providing access to some of these other tools might be challenging. And so maybe that's something that we need to put some pressure on TechSoup or some of these companies to provide some of these kind of tools at a more forgiving rate for nonprofits. All right. So yeah, definitely the big winner was retention strategy. So using email, Zoom, social media, so volunteers get more comfortable using technology. And I think that, is, that's really important, right? Because the technology, if you didn't have to use it before, you will certainly have to use it right now. And that whole paradigm shift of having to use technology, I think will be a lasting impact for all of your organizations going forward. And I know it can be kind of a painful transition to adapt to new systems and to do the training and to implement some of these things. But I think the benefits to your organizations long term will really kind of bear out over the next couple of years as you're able to be more comfortable with these technologies and these platforms, to use them more effectively. So I think that there's some good long-term outcomes for the short-term pain that we're experiencing. But one of the things I was thinking about is, we're talking about kind of technology and how many of you work with, older volunteers, is that there's also a huge opportunity to try to connect with younger volunteers too, because a lot of younger professionals and a lot of younger folks are also kind of experiencing, problems right now and challenges. A lot of people working in the gig economy are also, facing downturns in their, job prospects, which is not great for them. But on the flip side, they may have some extra free time, and a lot of people are going kind of stir crazy at home with nothing to do. So in that retention strategy, you might also want to consider ways in which you can start connecting with different volunteer demographics. People who might be a little bit more tech savvy, people who maybe can do some of the training, the implementation to help you maybe as an organization implement different technologies or identify technological tools to assist you with various stages in the process of volunteer management. So I really encourage you to kind of think about, engaging a broader swath of volunteers, when you start to develop some of these strategies. Working together as a community, I think, is really important, and making sure that all of your organizations are talking together, that you're able to do referrals. I know one of the challenges that somebody had mentioned before was they have a lot of volunteer applications, but they don't have anything for them to do right now. And so maybe taking some time to be familiar with volunteer opportunities at other organizations. So if you have a volunteer that you can't work with right now, maybe you can connect them with another organization that could really take advantage of their skills or expertise. And I think the more we're able to do that, the more successful we'll all be. Okay. So I'll make sure we get a copy of all of these to everybody, the responses. And with that, I'm just going to say a couple quick things. So, Globally Good, our long-term goal is to develop a platform to make volunteering easier for nonprofits, volunteers, and affinity organizations. Affinity organizations are, employers or service fraternities or groups of that nature. So if you're interested in helping us pilot test any of our services, we'd love to hear from you. Also, we'd also like to meet with any of you one-on-one to learn more about your organizations and any challenges that you might be facing working with volunteers, because our goal really is to have a deep understanding of the needs and challenges that all of you face as volunteer managers with your organizations. So you can see our website, www.wearegloballygood.org. My name is Chris Elsner. I'm the Chief Executive Officer. My email is chris@wearegloballygood.org. Basil Ramadan is our Chief Technology Officer. His email is basil@wearegloballygood.org. I'm sorry, I think I missed an S in your name in there. Basil.
Yeah, it is BASSIL. Sorry about the confusion.
And then Hunter Ackerley is our Chief Operating Officer, and she's hunter@wearegloballygood.org. So we'd love to hear from you and talk more with you about kind of the challenges you're facing and to hear more about that. So now we can kind of open it up if there are any last questions or anything that didn't get mentioned that should have. If you have any questions for us, or if there's anything that any of you wanted to share. We do have everyone muted, so if you would like to talk, either let us know in chat or maybe indicate in the participants list a yes, or something like that, so we know. And I'm going to go ahead and end screen sharing. So we can come back to the gallery view. There we go.
So again, if you hit that participants menu on the bottom, then you'll see a participants list of everyone who's involved in the chat or involved in the call, pardon. And then on the bottom of that, there's 5 options. So you'll see a green checkbox that says yes, and then no, and then go slower, go faster. If you go ahead and hit any one of those, then we'll sort of try to call on you in order, just so we don't have chaos of speaking over each other. For any general questions, really. Or thoughts, ideas.
Yeah.
Dee Derek posted something on lending programs, lending computers. Can you tell us some more about that? Because I think that's an important issue.
Yeah, so I mean, generally speaking, access is somewhat difficult, and that varies across different communities. And it's something that is not just nonprofits, but the public health community, among others, is working to sort of resolve, is access to internet and access to technology. So it's a very difficult issue to confront across different types of communities. But overall, one of the best things that you can do for your organization is for example, D. Derek commented, we are lending some older computers, and if you have some of those in your office or within your facility, that's fantastic. I know that there are schools are finally getting out of session, so if there's a school that you have a close relationship with, or if there's other organizations that maybe have a plethora of computers that you can maybe reach out to, it would be a conversation to be had between your organization and others to say, we have work to be done, but we simply need this older generation to have computers. And that varies from different types of relationships, but whether you have those in-house or if you have those through potentially a partnership that you could now be forming, it can really, really make the difference in terms of access for volunteers that are ready to volunteer, but don't necessarily have the tools for it.
Any other questions, comments?
There was one other comment that from Emily Wall. She'd like to talk more in depth about online or recorded training available out there. And my guess is you all could.
You muted yourself for the last half of that.
Oops, sorry about that. You all, meaning people online as well as Globally Good guys and lady, probably know some good resources. I know TechSoup has stuff online, good resources. Maybe, or Emily Wall, if you're still here, you might want to ask a little bit more about that, because I think other people are looking for help.
Yeah, and I mean, I wish I had, some great resource or something to share, but there are so many of them out there. And I think a lot of content in particular has really shown up since COVID-19 and since social distancing has taken place to help people understand how to use various forms of technology. Almost every platform that you might want to use probably has some, FAQs, some video orientation, some video things. Always making sure you're checking the websites for any tools that you're using. Those would probably be the first place to go to for any kind of resources, since they come from the manufacturer provider themselves. But to be fair, I mean, whenever I run into a problem or a challenge with technology or something that I don't understand or something I need to solve, I usually just ask Google. And more often than not, it brings up maybe not the right answer, but it brings up an answer which helps me ask a better question to Google the next time to get to the answer I'm looking for. And YouTube, can always be kind of a mixed bag in what you get. It's hard just to maybe find quality content on YouTube sometimes as opposed to promoted content. But there's a lot out there. And so I know video production is a challenging thing, and it takes a lot of skills and technology to do well. And so, don't feel like your organization, you need to be producing a lot of original video content and training for using different tools or resources. Please try to go take advantage of the different tools and videos that exist out there already, and keep your capacity focused to any sort of video training or tools that are really going to help and are specific to your organization.
Yeah, and then adding to that point is, if you do have specific content that maybe you can't necessarily find out there, then also don't be afraid to generate a video that may not be perfect in its production value, but still communicates your message. Because one of the things that's critical to nonprofits now is to maintain their message and their forms of communication, despite the fact that now we're sort of stepping into a more digital sphere for the foreseeable future. And then just some general tools. Some of you may be familiar with some of these, but these are tools that are sort of broadly available and free. For the most part, there's obviously going to be some paid features. And I'll type these in the chat in just a second, or if someone would like to type them and send them in the chat. There's Trello, which is really nice for organizing across different groups, because if everyone has an account, they can actually view what's these boards, which allow you to have checkable activities for each individual. And then going beyond that, there's the when to meet. So if you have maybe difficulty finding a time, when to meet sort of gives you this blocked out calendar versus necessarily having everyone sort of in this long email chain that we're all painfully aware of. That way you can send a single link and then people can vote, so that you don't necessarily have to deal with coordinating. And that one's, as far as I've seen, a completely free tool. They just have a small ad banner on the bottom. And then there was one more that I spotted. Oh, there's an anonymous, so then doodle polls, which are really a fantastic tool for either choosing a time to meet. There's also that feature, or if you would like to have sort of other decisions to be made and you need sort of this link that's clickable, versus necessarily, again, those long email chains can really lose a lot of people. The more you can sort of use these quick links, you can sort of minimize the over, like, people don't need to see when everyone is available. They can just see one unified platform for that. So there's definitely a lot of platforms out there, and like Chris said, there's so many that can be a little bit overwhelming, but the number one sort of hotspot is Google for just typing in your need, and usually you can at least find unanswered, even if it's not the right one.
And I also want to say that, in terms of volunteer engagement, because I know that's something that came up a lot, you also have to find the right engagement tool for your audience. So email is not always the most effective one, depending on your audience, and either that they don't use email as much, or they use email way too much and stuff just kind of gets buried. And a lot of people, get hundreds of emails a day, maybe have multiple email accounts, and so it's easy for stuff to get lost when you email them. So maybe thinking about, other platforms if they're, more comfortable. So Slack is a popular online platform for communication. There's some Microsoft Office versions, that do the kind of similar things. But also it might not be a bad time to, revisit the good old-fashioned phone call. I know my generation is not always keen on the phone call. It's not our preferred means of communication, but that's not the case for a lot of the older volunteers. So maybe that is a way to kind of keep in touch and keep engaged with those older volunteers and check in on them and get their feedback. So sometimes the old school stuff works just as well when you need to reach out and communicate with people.
Any other last minute thoughts, questions, ideas, comments, concerns, something else?
All right, well, I think we're just about time. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you to SAVMA and Diane for giving myself and my colleagues a chance to present. And chat with you all. Hopefully you all got something of value, at least one good thing to make it worth your time participating today. And I do want to thank you, to our participants, for spending some time with us this afternoon and listening to me talk. Hopefully some of the tools that we shared are informative. Hopefully you found the poll everywhere to be a more engaging aspect to some of the Zoom calls, maybe something you want to take advantage of as well. But I do appreciate your thoughtfulness and your feedback in the meetings and in the breakout groups as well. And so again, thank you especially to Diane for facilitating and making sure that we all had everything we needed to be successful today for the presentation. We did a couple walkthroughs to make sure everything would work flawlessly. And I think we did an okay job.
You did
broke.
a great job. And the three of you have some real resources that maybe we can tap in again on sometime. And I want to thank the people who came and shared the perspectives and the issues and their worries, and especially the woman who said, well, maybe we need to do things we're uncomfortable with. And so let's support each other in that process. We hope to see you next month for our meeting on the 18th of June on a recruitment tool through the United Way. So have a great evening, stay well, and thank you everyone. Bye now.
Everyone, stay safe.